President Donald Trump spoke in wide-ranging combative remarks that mixed upbeat claims about the U.S. economy with sweeping assertions about a major military campaign against Iran, new enforcement steps aimed at Iran's oil exports, and sharp personal criticism of Pope Leo XIV. Trump opened by pointing to what he called strong economic performance. He said, "We have some tremendous numbers released economically on jobs and everything else, and things are going very well." He added that things were holding up before pivoting immediately to the conflict, describing the situation in stark terms and portraying Iran as already effectively beaten. On the military front, Trump painted an extreme picture of Iranian losses and said U.S. actions had devastated Tehran's forces at sea and in the air. He said their military is destroyed, their whole navy is underwater. You know that 158 ships are gone, their navy's gone. He went further, insisting that key capabilities were now largely wiped out. He said their missiles are largely depleted, and in a broader assessment, he added, he said the manufacturing capability for missiles and drones is largely defeated. Trump then described what he framed as a new pressure campaign set to begin imminently, emphasizing a precise timeline. Asterisks, he said, as you know, at 10 o'clock tomorrow, we have a blockade going into effect. That'll be 10 o'clock tomorrow. He presented the move as part of an international effort to squeeze Iran's revenue, saying other countries were cooperating to ensure Tehran could not continue to profit from oil sales. In Trump's telling, the goal was to block the money that fuels Iran's ambitions, and he suggested the impact would be immediate. He argued that oil markets and shipping routes were central to the confrontation, and he claimed Iran's ability to move oil was being cut off not only through formal restrictions, but also through the way maritime traffic was being redirected. Writing to Trump, ships were adjusting their routes to avoid the Strait of Hormuz, and he complained that the United States was being exploited as a convenient supplier while others tried to evade risk in the Gulf. Trump described what he said he was noticing, vessels moving toward the United States to load crude and then depart with full cargoes. He said those ships were, in his view, trying to avoid passing through the region's choke points. He asserted that this workaround would be stopped eventually, but he insisted it was happening now, and he treated it as evidence that U.S. energy production gave Washington the upper hand. He credited his energy agenda for expanding domestic output, using a slogan familiar from his past campaigns, and repeating a claim meant to underline U.S. dominance. He said, "We have more oil because of drill, baby, drill." He then made an even bigger comparison, arguing the United States outproduced two of the world's top oil powers combined. Asterisks, he said, "We have more oil than Russia and Saudi Arabia put together." Addis, Trump described ships arriving empty and leaving filled up, presenting the moment as a demonstration of American leverage and as a reminder that he believes the country does not need to worry about energy shortages even in a major global crisis. As questions turned to Americans involved in the operation, Trump was asked for an update on two pilots. He offered reassurance and praise, describing them as safe and applauding their service. He said they are in very good shape and we're very proud of them, the two pilots. He did not provide details about their location, medical status, or whether they had already been returned to U.S. custody, but he framed their condition as strong and their mission as a point of pride. Trump also described talks and intelligence assessments in unusually confident terms, suggesting the United States understood Iran better than anyone else. He said there had been an exceptional lie-long meeting. He said we had a meeting that lasted 21 hours and argued that the conclusions were clear. Iran, he claimed, was desperate and weakening quickly. Even as he described Tehran as battered, Trump returned repeatedly to his core red line: nuclear weapons. He insisted the United States would not allow Iran to obtain one. He said Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. He repeated the pledge and framed it as absolute, saying the country still wanted a weapon and had made that clear, but that it would not be allowed to happen. When asked how long he would wait for Iran to return to talks, Trump brushed off the premise that he needed them at all. Asterisks, he said, "Oh, I don't know. I don't care if they come back or not." Asterisks, he then took the argument further, presenting Iran's alleged battlefield losses as the reason diplomacy was no longer necessary. He said, "If they don't come back, I'm fine." Trump claimed that in his view, Iran's ability to continue the FE fight was collapsing, and he characterized U.S. conduct as restrained. He said the United States had been very nice and suggested it had avoided broader damage, with one key exception that he described as retaliation for a broken commitment. In his account, the dispute centered on passage in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said Iran had promised to open it and then failed to do so. Asterisks, he said, remember, their promise was that they were going to open the Harmonious Strait. They didn't do it. They lied. Aztec, the phrasing was muddled, but his meaning was clear. He argued Iran broke its word, and he presented that as justification for escalation. He also suggested U.S. strikes had spared infrastructure in many cases, not ripped down too many bridges, as he put it, but that at least one bridge was hit because Iran broke their word. Pressed about whether other countries were helping, Trump responded that they were now stepping up. He said multiple countries were willing to cooperate and suggested they would increasingly turn to U.S. supply rather than Iranian oil as restrictions tightened. He described the picture as moving quickly and implied more announcements could follow, but he declined to name specific governments. In his telling, the immediate situation was that ships were already heading up toward the United States to load oil, and he framed that as proof that American output was the alternative that the world would rely on. He said the boats were empty on arrival and would leave filled up, and he portrayed this as both an opportunity and a frustration, a sign that America had the supply, but also a reminder that other nations and firms would look out for themselves. Then the remarks took an unexpected turn to domestic politics and religion after Trump was asked about his criticism of Pope Leo XIV on Truth Social. Trump did not soften his language. He said he was unhappy with the Pope's approach and questioned his judgment on crime and global security. He said, "I don't think he's doing a very good job." He added, asterisk, he said, "I don't like it. I'm not a big fan of Pope Leo." Trump's critique centered on two themes: law and order in cities and the standoff with Iran. He claimed the Pope's priorities were misplaced and suggested the Pope was focused on fear of Trump rather than what Trump described as real-world threats. Trump referenced the COVID era and said religious leaders were arrested under pandemic restrictions, describing it as persecution and using it as an example of what he sees as institutional weakness. He also said he did not want a religious figure, especially the Pope, to suggest Iran should be tolerated as it pursues nuclear capability. Trump framed the confrontation in apocalyptic terms, warning that a nuclear-armed Iran would risk catastrophe. He argued that the Pope was too permissive, too accepting of disorder in cities, and too willing to toy with a regime seeking nuclear weapons. Trump described Pope Leo as politically liberal and portrayed him as soft on crime. He said he's a very liberal person. And in one of his most pointed lines, Trump added, he said he's a man that doesn't believe in stopping crime. He also criticized what he suggested was the Pope's view of dealing with Iran, saying he did not want religious leadership that would accept the risks he believes Iran poses. When asked about whether he would accept a proposal involving a third country, Trump refused to engage, calling the question too hypothetical and saying he did not want to answer it that week. He left the door open without committing, and he moved on to broader frustration with allied support. That frustration sharpened when the topic turned to NATO. Trump said he remained disappointed in the alliance and argued that its members failed to support the United States during this crisis. He complained that the U.S. pays enormous sums and yet did not receive the backing he wanted. Why? And it mattered most. He said, "I'm very disappointed in NATO." He said they weren't there for us. Trump argued that NATO's core mission has long been to deter Russia and protect Europe, and he questioned why the U.S. should shoulder so much of the burden. He said he had long thought the arrangement was a little ridiculous, and he signaled that he was considering closer scrutiny of U.S. commitments and the costs involved. In Trump's version of events, NATO countries only began to come up once the danger was largely over. He said now they want to come up, but there's no real threat anymore. He suggested their support arrived late, and he implied it might not be rewarded. Asked whether he would punish countries that refused to help, Trump did not give a clear answer, but he did not rule it out. He said, "We'll see what happens." He said the entire relationship was headed for very serious examination, again emphasizing the money and the M. A lance, he believes, exists between U.S. contributions and allied action. Throughout his remarks, Trump presented the U.S. position as dominant, strong economic numbers, abundant domestic oil, an adversary he claimed was on the brink, and pressure tools, including a blockade and coordinated efforts to disrupt oil sales that he suggested would tighten quickly. He repeatedly described the conflict as nearing a point where the outcome was already decided, while also insisting his administration would not compromise on the nuclear issue. He closed as he began, projecting confidence and control, insisting the United States had both the economic and strategic leverage to dictate the next phase, and warning that alliances, religious leaders, and adversaries alike would be judged by whether they supported his approach.